Welcome to SIIMcast, a podcast brought to you by the Society for Imaging Informatics in Medicine.
Welcome to SIIMcast. In this episode, we continue our mini-series in which, in each episode, we sit down and interview the author of a chapter from the Practical Imaging Informatics Textbook. Today, we cover Chapter 9, PACS and Other Image Management Systems. Our guest today is Nikki Fennell. Nikki currently works at Stanford Health Care as Principal Clinical Systems Analyst. She has over 20 years of experience in the imaging field, having held a variety of operational and technical support roles in both clinical and vendor organizations. She is a proud tenured CIIP or Certified Imaging Informatics Professional and currently serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees for the American Board of Imaging Informatics. And she is chair of the Education Committee for the Society of Imaging Informatics in Medicine. This episode has a lot of useful information, so sit back and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Here we are, and we have Nikki Fennell as part of our PIIRT series for covering the Practical Imaging Informatics Resource Textbook. And today, we'll be taking a look at PACS and other image management systems. And Nikki, maybe we can set the table. You know, for many of us in the Western world, it's hard to imagine what life would be without PACS. It's almost like breathing and air. We expect to have PACS, but there's large parts of the world that still rely on film. So just to set the table, could you just briefly define what is a PACS and what are some of the benefits as opposed to using film as in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So PACS is an acronym, right, for Picture Archiving and Communication Systems. And in our world, it's the primary application that we utilize for the management of digital medical imaging. So its primary purposes are storage, distribution, and display of the imaging for various levels of consumers of imaging data. So I'd say the benefits of PACS over traditional film-based environment, like you talked about, in our world, PACS is prevalent. It's not prevalent everywhere, but the benefits are largely realized through operational efficiencies. And I think by that, I mean, there's improved data management overall. You have embedded diagnostic tools. The accessibility is, it's increased accessibility for sure. Security is better. And of course, the ability to be able to distribute the imaging much more quickly. Additionally, I think the long-term cost savings are a benefit over the use of film for imaging.
Thank you, Nikki. And so a quick question, again, thinking that we don't know anything about PACS for our audience. And one thing that I wonder at baseline is every PACS the same, right? And we can talk about how things change between different vendors, but at the basis is if I go out into the marketplace and I sign a contract for just a basic PACS, right? Am I getting the exact same product, the exact same service, or is the term PACS not so homogeneous every time?
That's a pretty good question. And I would say that, yes, I believe, and Jason, you can correct me because you have also this experience as well, but I believe that PACS as an application, there are very basic functions that you expect no matter what the vendor is, right? So if you are going out and making a purchase for PACS, you expect it to do X, Y, and Z. And, again, those are the primary things of storage, distribution, and display. Those are the key things. And every PACS should offer that.
Yeah, it makes me think of how it was very on trend a couple of years ago to hear the term deconstructed PACS, that separation, but there were always those core components that would be there. And then you'd layer on the other components that would be there, like work list or whatever. But yeah, no, they're very interesting. Maybe we could just keep going on that thought. And would you be able to kind of continue with that and describe the relationship that the PACS has with other enterprises like the RIS or the EMR?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the, let's say, ecosystem of healthcare technology in a hospital and other environments as well, PACS is always a downstream system from the EMR or the EHR. And typically, the organizational EMR is what maintains the gold copy of all the patient data. And it functions in the capacity of like the modern day paper chart. We used to have paper charts for our patients. Now you have EMRs. Those include all the demographics, the patient's billing information, their health history, all the study results, all of those things. The RIS, the Radiology Information System, is utilized by the radiology department or radiology practices as their primary operational system. And that enables things like scheduling and management of exams, technologist workflow, and also is the final sort of storage place for the results of the exams as they get read out by the radiologists. I'd say in many cases today, too, the RIS is actually a component of the EMR system. Most of the larger EMR vendors have the RIS embedded into that system. So all of that said, PACS relies really heavily on the RIS, since that system is responsible for generating accession numbers, which are the unique study identifiers that we use to kind of tie all of these orders, data, and images together.
So one of the questions I had is, we're getting back down to the foundational aspect of PACS. And, with this being said, I'm curious, sometimes there's the curse of knowledge. We know things so well. So this is more about you authoring this as an expert in this area. Did you find it a challenge making sure that you were covering everything? Because sometimes we become so good at something, it's easy to gloss over some of the basics. So just as far as kind of the authorship of this chapter, how did you find approaching this topic?
I think that because it was very foundational, it was easier to go back to those roots. And frankly, I was very fortunate in this chapter to actually be able, this chapter was in the first version of the book, and I was very fortunate to sort of piggyback on a lot of the foundational information that was already there from the previous authors and just give it a refresh and an update with new information. But again, Jason, this is at the root of what we do every day, or at least what I do every day. So this was an easy topic, if you will.
So before we get into some of our more foundational questions, what were some of the changes, Nikki, that you saw for the previous edition of the book? If there's too many, that's totally understandable. What were like the top, let's say, one or two updates that maybe were challenging or just really that, you thought deserved the most attention for our readers?
The key piece that I can think of off the top of my head is we added "and other image management systems" to talk about how PACS is not the primary image management, system in our organizations, right? So we talked about, touched on enterprise archives. We added in point-of-care ultrasound systems. I wasn't sure if that really related in this chapter, but as we went through and, as I started writing it, it made sense because, we know some of those systems actually are where imaging is stored, right? So I think on a very basic level, most of this information, doesn't change. It's foundational. There was a lot of things that didn't need to be touched. There was some editing that I did and some updating for modern day, technology that maybe had changed since 10 years ago. But for the most part, this was a well-written chapter. I was very fortunate to be able to bring in version 2.
So thank you, Nikki. And we agree. I mean, we love the chapter as well. And actually, when you mentioned the point of care ultrasound topic, and I think that was something that stood out for me at least. Can you talk more about those points specifically and I guess how you see practical implementation of the content in the book regarding point of care ultrasound or POCUS in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because point of care ultrasound is like literally performed at the point of care to augment, a physical exam, by nature, these exams are typically not scheduled and or subsequently reviewed by a radiologist. So you have to get more creative with workflow to make it functional in your environment. And the use of this technology is ubiquitous. I mean, it's really taken off in a lot of organizations, and they have become really important aspects of ongoing patient care. So, you have to figure out ways to store them, not only for, clinical correlation, which is the key, but I see in a lot of organizations that are doing this, another key driver for storing the exams, to be honest, is the ability to bill for the services. And today, a lot of point of care vendors have their own systems that you can purchase specifically for that functionality, where they can store, they can help you with billing, they do QA, all of those things. If you want to look at a larger integrated ecosystem and you want to bring the point of care in to storing it in your PACS and seeing image links in RIS, there's a lot more work that has to go into ensuring that the workflow is functional, not only for those of us who are used to a typical radiology orders-based image capture workflow, but also we have to keep in mind how to accommodate our clinicians that work outside of radiology so that this doesn't impede their day-to-day work.
That makes me think about governance to an extent. And so, Nikki, is there any consensus or any discussion about governance for point of care ultrasound images? For example, if these images are acquired in the emergency department and then available on PACS, if I'm the radiologist that's reading out a ultrasound that's not a point of care ultrasound, it's actually a formal ultrasound for the sake of the conversation. I've heard about different ways to approach, do you reference the images from the point of care ultrasound? It's still in PACS, but in terms of who's responsible for those images, what's the bleeding discussion on there?
I think it's interesting that you bring up governance, because I think that governance is hugely important to being successful in any kind of implementation of this. But at the same time, if you think about in a hospital organization, the ED is where you're going to see the most of this, right? I mean, primarily point of care ultrasound happens a lot in the ED, but it happens all over. And I think the low-hanging fruit is to try to make sure that you're on the same page with the ED. And it's a debate. I'm going to be honest with you. I've sat in a lot of meetings about it. It's a debate. Some radiologists don't ever want to see those images. Some of them want to see everything that's ever done on a patient. So the governance piece plays a huge part. You have to have everybody at the table so that the decisions that are made and put through for future state make sense to everyone.
I think it's interesting as well as everyone talks about it as being the new stethoscope, and you see so many medical students that are, equipped with this now. So, the adoption rate is only going to go up, and it's interesting. I think it'll be a fun administrative task ahead for all. Well, we'll see where it goes.
A lot of work. It is.
So keeping in this trend, because you had mentioned encounters-based imaging workflow, and you alluded to non-radiology workflows, so, enterprise imaging. So where does PACS play into this? And, maybe if we talk about PACS playing into enterprise imaging, our cardiology is kind of where my mind goes to first. So maybe you could take it from there and tell us the relationship that PACS plays into EI.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can, depending upon how you structure an enterprise imaging strategy within an organization, it can play, obviously it plays a large role, but it can play an even larger role if you are starting out your EI journey by utilizing your PACS as your imaging archive, right? That makes things a level more challenging, right? Because many PACS aren't able to ingest different types of imaging in a native format. So that's kind of where you have to rely on having skilled imaging informatics professionals at the table that can kind of help bridge those knowledge gaps and work across the various image capture departments to make sure everybody's data is stored appropriately and accessible appropriately within their different systems. But I think in a mature model for enterprise imaging, PACS is just one piece of it, and you have a archive, be it an enterprise archive, a VNA, whatever you want to call it, and everything can get stored exactly as it needs to be for each different department.
So I have a question that's not exactly EI, but it's actually beyond enterprise itself. And so for context, I can't think of the number of times in the last few weeks while on call I've had trouble getting outside imaging, right? Sometimes patients will bring in discs. I can't believe we still use discs, by the way. That's a whole separate conversation. But patients bring in discs, they'll upload the images, and sometimes you have the entire series in PACS, sometimes you don't. But is there a role to extend PACS beyond the walls of an enterprise, right? Are we thinking about a future with universal PACS where you can have image sharing through PACS itself? Or is that too complicated with many, it could be legal, technical implications, but what are your thoughts on a PACS that's not constrained by an enterprise to enable image sharing?
That's a really interesting concept, actually. But I think that we have a good chunk of image sharing vendors in the market, right? I think at this point, if I'm thinking correctly, Jason, there's 3 large vendors that have the lion's share of all of the business in image sharing. What I think would be great and would make things easier is if they all communicated with each other. So shout out to all my image share vendors. If you guys would work on a way to be able to share easily amongst each other, that would really solve a lot of the problems kind of that you're seeing. Ali, I believe that part of that, especially the fact that we still have discs and, things like that moving around, we hear the term ditch the disc all the time, and everybody wants to get on board with that because, man, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, it's an inconvenience, and it's a lot of time, right? So I don't know if I would see like PACS, a large scale PACS utilized in that capacity, but if we could get our vendors to cooperate with each other, it'd be fantastic. Make things easier.
One comment I'll add to that is, so being in Canada, and we are more of a socialist country, there are provinces, especially the smaller provinces. So Canada Health Info was a federal agency that wanted to see one patient, one record, image sharing across the country. And that was assigned down to provincial levels. Like Nova Scotia was essentially a provincial PACS. And the others were set up more like BNAs. But sorry, Nikki, go on.
No. I had completely forgotten about that because I had a little bit of work with that with one of my former employers. But maybe that's like the difference, though, between having, the capability of maybe some mandates from a higher level that says, hey, we're going to make this happen, than we do. Obviously, here we're just doing whatever we want in the United States. So, yeah.
And the image sharing is it's a hot topic, hot button issue for me. I find that whole ditch the disc effort has been an interesting one in that the focus has been on eliminating this physical media, but often I see the workflows are still very much in place where you have some person that is, a former film librarian or something like that is reconciling that against an order and making sure that it can ingest into the PACS in a way that's going to be read by the radiologist. So you've removed the disc, but the workflow is still an arduous task to get that into the PACS. And that's where, making that a little bit more seamless is maybe the end goal there, but we'll see where we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely ways to make that happen, There's definitely ways. And I know in this chapter, actually, there is a little blurb about a real life story for improving outside imaging workflow. And that actually came from an organization that I worked for. A colleague of mine at Children's Colorado actually designed his Six Sigma Greenbelt process improvement project around streamlining that outside imaging ingestion workflow. And it was, he utilized our existing DICOM router application and, the associated HL7 toolset, and was able to design and automate study order creation that came via the RIS whenever an outside exam was received in the PACS. So in the long run, it took a long time to get it right. There was a lot of work building it out, but it was immensely successful because it delivered on several fronts. Like it entirely eliminated the need for any outside exam orders to be entered by the clinicians and their staff. The only orders that had to go in were ones for overreads. And then it significantly cut down on that manual work you were just talking about, Jason. The manual work that was performed by the archive team, they didn't have to create orders or match things up. It just happened. And the time that it took for receiving an outside exam to being able to review it in PACS, that time was reduced by 94%. Oh. So it was an enormously successful project in the end. It was pretty cool to see that come to life.
we're hoping that our readers have success stories of their own inspired by this now. So if you're listening out there, we here at SIIMcast are waiting to hear about your follow-up. So going back to a quick comment I'd hinted at earlier, this idea of PACS coming in different flavors. So it was only recently that I found out that there isn't just a single clinical combined with research PACS, that you can actually have clinical and research PACS. And so I think this would be a good time to talk more about those differences. And Nikki, maybe you can help us understand more what the role of a research PACS is and how that fits into workflow. And the reason I say that is I know there can be some complicated workflow considerations when you're thinking about transferring files or images, reports, etc., from a clinical PACS through a de-anonymization process to the research PACS, among others. But before we get into all of that, what is the role of a research PACS and how should that actually fit into workflow?
In especially academic institutions, but in many organizations that participate in any kind of research imaging studies, it's important to be able to separate them out. Let me say this, it's not required, right? Like as you noted, maybe recently you had learned that there's, the capability to do or the need to separate them out. But having a separate research PACS makes things a lot easier for simply the management of the imaging, because the requirements for research imaging storage are really different than those in clinical utilization, right? I mean, you noted anonymized data. That is the preference in a research imaging PACS. In a clinical system, obviously, none of that is anonymized unless you're going to use it for, conference presentations or things of that state. But I would say that I would say most academic institutions for sure have more than one environment, and largely because it's the volume of data that's used in the research capacity and the types of things you need to do to manipulate the data are very different than what you do in clinical workflow.
Do you think it's going to be more common to contract with both a clinical and a separate research PACS vendor going forwards? Or do you think it's a service most likely offered by the same clinical vendors just to keep things compatible on premises?
I think it depends on what you want to do with the data in the long run, right? Because there's a lot of organizations that will still have a research PACS that they're utilizing for, I'm working on this study, so I have this bucket over here that I'm feeding data into. But at the same time, they will also have a contract with, like you were saying, a third-party cloud vendor to be able to share that data amongst a larger group of people participating in the same study, right? So it makes it easier to have larger buckets of data that are accessible to your pharma organizations or, other people that you're working with. So I think there's versions of both, right?
I'm curious, what do you see from a management perspective or administrative perspective with these research PACS at academic centers? Are they typically managed by the same PACS team that manages the radiology PACS, or does it tend to be their own research PACS team? What do you find?
I think it's managed on a very basic level. It's managed by the imaging IT group, but there's a lot of access that's granted to the researchers and the research teams within that system, well beyond what you would ever give users in a clinical PACS, right? Because they're doing a lot of things that you're kind of cutting out the middleman by giving them the ability to take care of a lot of that stuff themselves, right?
And so thinking about the different roles of PACS, I've been noticing, especially we have to talk about AI. I feel like we can't avoid that topic. So I'll go ahead and bring it up. But as we start to see more and more AI algorithms deployed clinically, and we start seeing these AI marketplaces, I'm starting to see a trend where you have a PACS vendor that gives you this basic service, right? This basic app. And then you can contract several AI algorithms that can add on to it. Is that an appropriate paradigm, or is there a different way that you see PACS interacting with AI applications with the marketplace? What's kind of the industry standard right now in terms of that relationship?
Yeah, I think today, first I'll say there are a lot of PACS vendors themselves that are really jumping on this AI, development bandwagon, right? They're sort of playing catch up to the folks that have already been out there working, in smaller startup type organizations to get their AI algorithms and their AI tools off the ground. But yeah, I mean, PACS today plays the role of like an aggregator for many imaging AI tools, right? Simply by being the place where they connect in so that they can be utilized in the radiologist workflow as easily as possible. It's really all about ensuring adoption of those tools, right? I think the marketplace model is really what is prominent today. I think we may see that kind of shift more as our PACS vendors start to acquire and bring these kind of tools into their own environments. But definitely, I would say just in general, we're ripe for an opportunity to develop, some more educational opportunities around how all of these integrations work. Because I think from my personal experience, and I know from those of some of my colleagues I've talked to about this, like there's a lot of stuff popping up on, you can get education for clinicians to learn about how to use AI, but there's not really any good resources for how imaging informatics professionals can integrate, manage, and scale all of these solutions because it's a lot of work and we're just figuring it out as we go along.
Thank you. No, and I've experimented with a few of the newer PACS, and I'm starting to notice that the user interface often differs too in terms of how you can interact with either homegrown models or commercial models from a third party or those offered by the PACS vendor. And one thing I was thinking about, is as certain PACS vendors, whether or not they dedicate more resources, or they just find a way to get really good at it, essentially. Are we going to start seeing, I guess proprietaries would be the best word here in terms of, are we going to start seeing them offer proprietary models that may be highly coveted, but only offered through their PACS? Is there a risk of that sort of territory war, or are we heading more towards the open source, non-proprietary context?
I wish we were heading towards the latter, but I think that you maybe hit the nail on the head that as these larger vendors are able to acquire these companies and mold them into their own products to make it as seamless as possible, then yeah, it's going to be, oh man, this is the greatest tool and it has helped so much with my work list, but you can only get it if you buy PACS X, right? So I want to believe that we are moving away from that sort of direction, but I think that's what we're going to see more of, unfortunately.
And say if we're in the latter case, do you see a role for PACS to serve as the AI orchestrator role, right? I know some vendors are starting to offer it, at least on a research basis, but are we seeing PACS assume this AI orchestrator role as long as we have an AI marketplace and third-party solutions available?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a direction that makes sense, right? Because they're already, PACS is already playing that role in a way because everything integrates with it. The advantages that you get from all these AI models and AI tools in imaging, they all integrate into the PACS, right? In other specialties, they have different utilization. But so, yeah, I mean, PACS is like the jumping off point, and I could see that becoming more like you said, Ali, the orchestrator, if you will.
It makes me think a bit about, back to our conversation, that's those seamless integrations of image sharing, those fit in very well for being able to do orchestration in an effective way that, wants to tease out specific studies for, a certain type of algorithm or a certain model. But yeah, no, I can't believe we've gone through this whole episode so far and we've been saying the word PACS and not MIMPs. I'm curious if you had any thoughts about that. I had to ask on this episode, but
it still makes me giggle when I hear it. I mean, and I honestly, since that, release came out, like now it's called MIMPs. I never hear it. Does anyone say that to you, Jason? Does anyone say, come look at my MIMPs?
I've never heard it. Yeah.
Well, maybe someone has to start saying it. We have to start seeding it. Right?
Start a trend. Come on. We're trendsetters, right?
I don't want to look at anyone's SIIMs, to be honest, but
yeah.
Ali, I think you got a question?
I do. Oh my gosh, I have so many questions. Nikki, by the way, I'm loving this conversation. I don't know if you can tell, but just real quick, going back to the AI bit, one thing that I always think about and I try to ask is, what are the thoughts on AI result storage? We're starting to see, I don't know if it's a divide, but I'm starting to see some discussion on whether it's the ethics or the legal implications of actually having secondary captures from AI results stored in PACS. Should they be stored? How long should they be stored? Even in some cases, thinking about the legal implications for it, like, if a true positive finding is ignored but left in the PACS as an AI result secondary capture, is that evidence that can be used in future cases? So again, there's a lot to think about, but where are we in this discussion? Or is it still pretty early, or are we starting to see a little more regulation, a little more decisiveness?
I would say it's still pretty early. And this is another topic that is of high debate, depending upon who's sitting at the table, right? Because there are physicians and clinicians who are very strong advocates for AI and utilization of AI in the clinical environment. And they would absolutely say that secondary captures that come in from these different environments should be stored in PACS. But the medical legal implications, like you pointed out, if you didn't look at that series, right, and you rendered your opinion and that was missed, that's where there's a lot more discussion that needs to be had. And not just at the clinician level. Obviously, this goes much higher into an organization's whole legal strategy, right? So I think it's still early. Personally, I think that we need to figure out a lot more things about how AI workflow fits before we commit to putting all of that data into our, long-term permanent storage. I think that there's just a lot of different ways it could go, but early stages, in my opinion. And Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've heard otherwise.
No, everything you're saying is 100% on board with. I actually have a question. You mentioned AI workflow, so it got me thinking about workflow in general. And, often when we think about AI and PACS, we think of image analysis, but there's so much more that goes into it. And a lot of the AI can be behind the scenes and the plumbing to improve workflow and hanging protocols and so on. I'm curious if you could share what you've seen or any interesting uses of AI from a workflow perspective.
I think that, it's going in all different directions, right? The lowest hanging fruit is to find ways to augment, diagnostics, right? So that's where a lot of focus is. I think the most interesting AI that I've seen is the stuff that helps with workflow efficiency, just like you said. Things that help optimize hanging protocols, things that help streamline how work lists are distributed equitably and make more sense, right? Things that help with voice recognition, all critical results that get managed on the back end that no one has to touch. Those kinds of AI developments, when you are actually impacting the time it takes for, image arrival to results getting out in a positive way, those things I think all impact that, right? Diagnostic areas today, it's not fast enough, right? We're taking data, we're feeding it into a model, whether it be on site or in the cloud, which if it's something that we're feeding data into the cloud, then you wait for it to process and come back in. You're actually adding time to how long it takes to interpret a study. That's got to get better. That's got to get faster for it to have more efficacy in that regard. I see more testing of the stuff that helps with interpretation and a lot more utilization of the things that help with workflow efficiency.
I think we got so excited about AI. I totally forgot to ask some of the more foundational questions. And Nikki, I'd love to hear more about post-processing, right? So this is discussed in the chapter. And honestly, coming from the perspective of a resident, specifically of a trainee, right? I never really understood post-processing for a while. All I knew is I had images in PACS, especially for cross-sectional imaging. I'd have a sagittal and a coronal reconstruction. I get bone algorithms. I get, different sequences for MR, but I just assumed it came like that. And then as you slowly go through training, you start realizing that this is all part of post-processing. But can you break down what is post-processing and how that actually looks like in practice for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the most base level, post-processing is when imaging data manipulation occurs, right? So we do that to further enhance and analyze the originally acquired images. And it can be done at the scanner. It can be done by the software itself. It can be done by the technologists. It can be done in 3D labs by 3D techs. It can be done by the physicians themselves. And, there's a range of different things that we do that we post-process. There's basic functions that are just like filtering and noise reduction, edge detection, and then more advanced functions and processes that are like segmentation and image registration. So the manipulation can be performed with tools that are embedded right in the PACS, which I'm sure you've seen. Ali, you can do those on your own, or otherwise applications that are integrated into the PACS. Like maybe you click on a link that takes you to a third-party vendor tool that takes your images and allows you to do really cool stuff with it. So once that's done, if it's done in an external system, then obviously the resulting changes to the imaging data get sent back to the PACS for physician review and then for final storage.
And so, for example, if I'm post-processing with the 3D software, is anything sent back to the PACS treated the same way as your DICOM images that stayed in PACS, for example, in terms of how long you store them and other considerations for a governance standpoint?
Yeah, once you have those series, and a lot of times they'll actually come in after an interpretation is done. So there might be an addendum made if there's like additional information that needs to be addressed with those, but they're permanently stored with that study. I myself have not seen, and I'm sure there are other organizations doing this, but I myself have not seen any kind of rules that would delete those series and keep the rest of the, the basic DICOM originally acquired images. They stay there permanently as well.
Well, this has been a very entertaining conversation. I've really enjoyed this. And going into this about a topic that we're all very familiar with, it's nice to have these conversations. They're foundational in nature, and it's good to go through this. I was wondering if you had any closing comments to make before we close out.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks for, inviting me. I also enjoyed the conversation. I think we tend to get so busy in all of the crazy things that we do in our world that we don't really think about things on the basic level and all these tools that we use that make it all possible, right? But you guys have really provided some thoughtful questions, and really the direction of where things are going is on the mind of everyone, particularly in the era of artificial intelligence. So we'll see, maybe we'll have another conversation in 5 years and it'll be a totally different world, right?
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
SIIMcast has been brought to you by the Society of Imaging Informatics in Medicine. Please visit our website at SIIM.org for more information and educational content, including webinars and an archive of prior episodes. Please follow us on Twitter at @SIIM_tweets. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support.